Welcome viewers to the series on exploring careers and global security. This episode is focused on China's rise, technology, energy, regional trade, security, and strategic implications. My name is Wiatt Hinton. I'm a senior at Middlebury, majoring in Chinese and political science. And today I want to introduce our speaker, joined by Brian Harding, class of '03. He's currently the senior expert for Southeast Asia at the United States Institute of Peace. Welcome and thanks for joining us, Brian.
It's my pleasure.
So this series is focused on exploring a different number of professional areas in global security and kind of like giving students just experience and exposure to what people like you do. And so just to start, could you tell us, and you at the United States Institute of Peace, could you tell us how the USIP, like what role it plays in global security and what you do there?
Sure. I should start by saying I'm pretty new to the United States Institute of Peace, USIP. I just joined about 8 months ago. So during the pandemic, started virtually. Have literally never set foot in the building since starting working there. Haven't seen my colleagues except for virtually. Just started out the USIP, though. It's a fantastic organization. It's a national, nonpartisan, independent institution, but it was actually founded by Congress, dedicated to the proposition that a world without violent conflict is possible, practical, and essential for U.S. and global security. So a pretty good mission statement. We were founded in 1984 when President Reagan signed legislation, and we moved into an iconic building on the National Mall here in Washington, D.C. I think a little over 10 years ago. In practice, we work with foreign governments, civil society, U.S. officials around the world to research, support, and advance strategies to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict. And I can talk a little bit about my role as we move into it, but I should say, I'm happy to have this opportunity to share some perspectives. The world that I inhabit here in Washington, D.C., that I've inhabited for the last 17 years as I count it. Really, I didn't know a lot about it when I was at Middlebury, and in these 17 years, I've bounced around and looked at China, East Asia from a number of different perspectives. So happy to be able to share some wisdom here today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've seen you've done a lot of like work with Indonesia, Japan, and China. So I think you'll be able to just provide a lot of information. So could you tell students a bit about like what your role is specifically at USIP?
Yeah, so my role is new, and I should say it's, I'm still getting to know the organization myself. We're about, I think, over 400 people. We have offices in 6 or 7 countries around the world. But throughout most of USIP's history, and really, to this day, the Institute has been mostly engaged in countries where there is active conflict. So we have offices in Afghanistan, Iraq, I think South Sudan, Pakistan, for instance. We also have established new-ish offices in Tunisia and Myanmar as reform movements took shape over the last decades. There hasn't been a lot of focus on East Asia, largely because East Asia has been a relative success story. And we can talk about Asia's dynamism. And so a place like USIP wasn't naturally focused on it. USIP established a China program, though, about 4 or 5 years ago. And really the emphasis there is not about conflict with China or inside of China. It's about understanding what China's rising political and economic influence around the world means for conflict dynamics around the world. And my position was created in the last year to take a look at how rising Chinese influence is affecting conflict dynamics within Southeast Asia. But also there's plenty of work that USIP can do directed to support peace processes in the southern Philippines and Indonesia and other places, so we're exploring. USIP's interest in expanding work on Southeast Asia is certainly in line with what we've seen across the Washington, D.C. think tank ecosystem, business community, the U.S. government. Certainly over the last 15 years, there's been an uptick in interest in Southeast Asia. Basically, the United States pretty actively forgot about Southeast Asia in around 1975 and the end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. It started to realize in about 2005, 2006, and this is fortunately when I entered the fold here in Washington, that the United States has deep strategic interest in Southeast Asia, and we've been distracted and we needed to be engaged. A lot of that recognition in the mid-2000s came as a result of China. And the sense that somehow China was eating our lunch in Southeast Asia, that we'd been distracted, China was moving in. At that time, I think we could legitimately say that China was on a charm offensive in the region. And the interest has really picked up and intensified. And today, I would say, Southeast Asia is really the United States has deep interest in Southeast Asia. We should be interested in Southeast Asia, this region of 650 million people, $3 trillion economy, the most important sea lanes in the world, one of the regions most impacted by climate, by natural disasters, transnational crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We should be interested in Southeast Asia, regardless of what's happening in Beijing. But the reality is that it's also become the region of the world where US-China competition is playing out most acutely. So there's rising interest in Southeast Asia for reasons because of Southeast Asia itself, but also because of its place in this emerging competition between the United States and China and Asia and the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like having worked in that field, like studying and researching Southeast Asia for 15 years, how have you seen China's relationship with Southeast Asia chain, like with the ASEAN countries, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and how do you see that? How do you think it will progress in the future?
Yeah, so China is a reality in Southeast Asia, and China touches everything. China is the largest trading partner of every Southeast Asian country. The United States, U.S. foreign investment far outstrips Chinese in terms of accumulated stocks, because the United States has been investing in Southeast Asia since the 1950s. But China is certainly catching up. But it's important to note too that it's not just about the United States and China and Southeast Asia. Japan is a major player. India is a major player. Australia is a major player. The EU is involved. And Southeast Asia kind of likes it that way. In the grand scheme of things, Southeast Asia itself is incredibly diverse. So you have 250 million people in Indonesia with $1 trillion economy and real strategic weight of its own. You have Vietnam and the Philippines approaching 100 million people with growing economies. Of course, the COVID creates all sorts of other complications. Then you have a tiny sultanate in Brunei. You have this high tech, futuristic Singapore with 5 or 6 million people. So the region itself is very diverse. But in the grand scheme of things, they see themselves sitting between giants. Certainly the United States, China, others, they want as many countries as involved in their regional affairs as possible. They want a balance of power. They want to wrap us up into their institutions that hopefully keep us on their best behavior. But there's no question that, and China's a reality, right? And they want to, there's concern about Chinese security interests, potentially hegemonic interests in the region, how China's affecting downstream countries in the lower Mekong region in terms of because of dams up in, starting in Tibet. There's concerns. I mean, certainly, it was outrageous to Southeast Asians that China just built 3 islands in the South China Sea and started putting munitions on them. All that said, every country in Southeast Asia wants to have a productive relationship with China. They want to accrue as many economic benefits as possible. For the most part, Southeast Asian countries are almost all developing countries. They need Chinese investment. They need Chinese trade. China's not going away. China's on the doorstep. All that said, they want the United States to be as engaged as possible, to really balance out, particularly on the security front. And I think China, Southeast Asian opinion about China has waxed and waned. I think, in the mid 2000s, well, going back even further, so lots of skepticism about China during the Cold War, where China actively supported communist insurgencies in Malaysia and Thailand, et cetera. Most countries Southeast Asian countries did not normalize relations with Beijing until around 1990. Then you had a bit of a blossoming. China was seen to be a responsible actor in response to the 1997-1998 Asian financial crisis. China started, really was on a charm offensive, I think, through much of the 2000s. And then China sort of started to show its hand a little bit. Certainly with the South China Sea being the real flashpoint, and people across Southeast Asia largely started seeing Chinese intentions with clear eyes, but that doesn't mean that they don't want China around. And then meanwhile, I think the concern right now, for the most part in Southeast Asia, is not just about China. it's about a deteriorating U.S.-China relationship that they think is ultimately bad for Southeast Asia.
So what do you think are some of the like biggest issues or challenges like that you face and like that you work with?
First of all, I mean, you know, in terms of working on Southeast Asia, and you know, it's a fascinating field to work in. I mean, this is one of the most dynamic regions of the world, diverse. You want to study anything, you know, Southeast Asia can be a laboratory for it. But its diversity makes it incredibly difficult. I mean, my title at USIP, Senior Expert on Southeast Asia, I mean, frankly, it's preposterous, right? It would be hard enough to be an expert on any one country in Southeast Asia, let alone all 10 of them, and I certainly never will be. That said, though, you know, there's not enough expertise in the United States on Southeast Asia. So, you know, being the smartest person in the room on these 10 countries is often a frustratingly easy exercise. You know, from my perspective, so certainly the East Asia is the most dynamic, important center, you know, region of the world. Its importance is only going to increase. The history of the 21st century is largely going to be written in Asia. But Asia is a very multipolar place. It's not just about China. It's not just about US, Japan. Southeast Asia is where a lot of this competition is playing out. And we need a lot more Americans focused on Southeast Asia, but it's not easy. It's far away. It's diverse. Where do I even start here? But I would certainly encourage people who are thinking about Asia, maybe frustrated with studying Chinese or Japanese, to think about opportunities to explore Southeast Asia a bit as you enter the next phases of your development.
Yeah. So who do you, like, what other entities, you know, like policymakers or other think tanks, do you interact with the most in what you're doing?
Yeah, so let me just walk you just briefly through some of the organizations that I've worked with. And, you know, each of these places, some of them I was the first person to work on Southeast Asia, which I think just sort of says something. You know, just to make the story short, I mean, my exposure to Asia started with Japan. On a whim, I spent some time in Southeast Asia after spending my junior year at the Associated Kyoto program in Kyoto, Japan, through Middlebury. Spent some time in Indonesia and Thailand that summer, came back, really redirected my attention. I just took a year off between Middlebury and graduate school. I did a master's at the Elliott School at George Washington here in Washington, D.C. After grads, and you know, one of the great things about doing grad school in DC is that you have opportunities to do things outside the classroom. So I spent 20 hours a week the first year working at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, the leading think tank. Second year, I spent half my time at the National Defense University, their China Center. And after grad school, spent a year on a Fulbright in Indonesia. And then when my career started in earnest was really when I found myself back at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in 2007, 2008, 2009, where I was hired as the research associate for Southeast Asia, which was a new position. CSIS had been looking for funding to start up a Southeast Asia program for quite a while. Finally, as Washington woke up to the importance of the region in the mid-2000s, got some funding, hired me. I was there for a couple of years in a sort of classic Washington story. 2 years later, ended up in the Southeast Asia Policy Office at the Pentagon, Department of Defense, because my boss went in as one of the top Asia officials in the beginning of the Obama administration. There for 4 years, moved over to the Center for American Progress, a pretty political think tank here in Washington. I probably had the least political job in the entire organization, working on Asia policy though. But the leadership felt it was important to build out a broader Asia portfolio to make sure that individuals knew that we were, that the center was taking foreign policy in Asia seriously. From there, I moved back third time to CSIS, then as the deputy director of the Southeast Asia program, and then most recently to USIP. So there's this whole ecosystem of think tanks. It's been interesting to watch them grow in size and sometimes influence. So these are certainly organizations that are working on these issues. I work regularly with partners in US government, and a lot of this has not due to institutional relationships, but largely due to personal relationships, strong personal relationships back in the Asia shop at the Department of Defense. I regularly engage with the Asia and other officials at the State Department. I have regular meetings in a normal universe with the diplomatic community here. So the embassy is, another area, I know that we're supposed to keep this at least slightly career focused, is, there's been this interesting crop of boutique consultancies, for lack of a better term, in Washington, D.C. that have really developed over the last 10 years or so. And so there's a lot of people like me working on essentially analysis of political economy issues in Asia, but they're doing it in a proprietary way for clients. So there's this whole universe of people doing that. They're the international government relations people, another area of that you may not hear about or think about when you're in college. I mean, there's this world of government relations. So the biggest companies in the world all have people who are thinking about what changes in U.S. foreign policy and trade policy mean for businesses. So there's a pretty diverse ecosystem. I think people often think of the think tanks first because basically our job is to be famous. There's people doing very similar jobs whose job is not to. They're doing similar type of work, either internally within the government or for proprietary clients.
So thanks for sharing that. I was a little interested, I'm a senior, and a lot of kids who are seniors right now are stressed about getting a job, for obvious reasons. You majored in history and Japan studies, went to Japan, went to Indonesia.
Yeah.
So I'm also interested, how has your master's degree or your additional studies helped you in your career?
Yeah. So I think I took a bit of a unique path to where I am compared to a lot of my colleagues here at USIP and sort of people in my world. I did, as you mentioned, history. I did not take a single political science class. I took a handful of economics classes. Really, it was very area studies, history, language, religion, literature. Ultimately, I'm interested in the region and enjoy spending time in these places and somehow have managed to turn this into a career. So I think I laid a good foundation in terms of giving me the cultural intelligence to do this work while I was at Middlebury, but it was really the experience at grad school here in Washington, D.C. at a foreign policy oriented institution that really allowed me to take that somewhere. So I had not developed the skills that would allow me to translate it by the time I graduated. I think others do when you're in the international political economy, course of study and those sorts of things. So for me, that grad school experience, and it wasn't just a classroom experience, it was just being here in Washington, D.C., because I had not been in this environment, and doing internships while I was in school. That whole package really gave me an understanding of why this region that I found to be so interesting on a personal level was also really important for United States national interests. And so, I got that experience through going to school here in Washington. If you're interested in a policy-oriented career, you don't necessarily need to do your graduate work here in Washington, D.C., but I would certainly, having the opportunity to do internships, get yourself within this ecosystem, I think is quite an important thing to do, even if it's virtually in this environment today.
Yeah, that's interesting because I had just seen that you were it seemed like from school and from graduation, you seem to be set on studying Asia and Southeast Asia, and you seem to just care about it and have been advocating for it before it was popular to study it.
Yeah, I think the lesson there is that you just need to work on something you actually find interesting, and don't try to bend the world, too much, to your liking, or maybe you should be bending the world to your liking. I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm still excited every single time I get on an airplane to go to East Asia,
That's
Southeast
awesome.
Asia. You know, and I can assure you that people who chose to study parts of the world that you know, they did just because it was important, you know, don't have that sort of passion for it. So it's very gratifying in that sense, yeah, so it's great to have been able to turn this into a career. And I do think there's more people coming up just behind me who have had exposure to Southeast Asia, to Asia generally. And I am pretty hopeful for the future that we're going to have a deeper bench of talent.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever, have you only worked in DC, or have you like worked abroad, or do you just travel sometimes?
Yeah, good question. So I've been fortunate to be in jobs here in Washington that have allowed me to travel a lot. So, you know, I think it's very important to have that connectivity. And right now, I feel like I'm losing it because I haven't been to Asia in a year because of the coronavirus. But in general, you know, in these jobs that I've been in, I've been traveling 6, 8, 10 times a year to Asia, right? And so that sort of keeps you tapped in. Frankly, it has been a while since I've spent a real sustained series of months or you know, time in the region, and there's a lot to be said and a lot to be gained, but by those sorts of experiences. I think personally I've been able to make up for it by just really spending an awful lot of time on airplanes, and that's another way to do it. But certainly, you know, as I, you know, finding an opportunity to work or just spend time and you know, in any way you can, I think is important. And doing that right after college is certainly you know, a great time of life to do it. I mean, just candidly, we have 2 small kids here. We're not about to pack up and, you know, move to Vietnam the way I might have thought about doing that 10 or 15 years ago, you know, before that being my my personal reality. So, you know, certainly would recommend people coming out of school to spend some time. I mean, I would look at and I wouldn't think too hard about what the opportunity is. You know, just take whatever. In a lot of ways, you need to just take whatever you can coming right out of college. I think grad school always offers an opportunity to pivot if the first thing hasn't been quite right, or to really double down. But I think the important thing is just getting some kind of experience in the region is important. You know, certainly looking at things like, you know, Fulbright English teaching fellowships, you know, or Peace Corps. You know, those are certainly mechanisms to get out there. It's hard to find a job in the sort of capacity building, you know, aid universe right out of school, but those jobs are out there. In Southeast Asia, I think there have been more jobs in Myanmar than anywhere else, because that's where foreign assistance funding had sort of flooded in since the opening and reform there in 2012, 2013. But, you know, seizing any sort of opportunity to spend time out in the region will always help you. And I draw on the experiences I had as a Fulbrighter in Indonesia. You know, I did some separate language work in Indonesia. I've also just, you know, spent time teaching English in Thailand for a few months after college, and you know, I've also, in a couple of sort of gaps in life, spent some extra time just traipsing around Southeast Asia, and personally, you know, being able to pull on those reference points helps me, you know, when I, you know, sit down next to some random Southeast Asian diplomat and we can talk about, you know, their country, right? These things help. It's not just about strategy and policy, you know, it's also about human connections. And so having a feel for these places and a way to connect with people is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's honestly like the perfect way to end that. So Brian, thank you again for your engagement with us and helping students prepare for their, you know, first career destinations. This concludes the episode within the series, Exploring Careers in Global Security. In closing, I would encourage viewers to tune in to get more career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations in our other episodes. I would encourage you to tune into the other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the events and programs tab on the CCI website. We have events in innovation, large enterprises, and Capitol Hill if you're interested. And thank you for watching.